I can't remember how old I was exactly or how it happened, but I was thinking that maybe you guys could help me figure out what it was and why the image of it is still in my memory. At the time, I was living in my grandparents' house, and though I don't remember what day or year it was, I remember all the family was there celebrating, perhaps a birthday or some kind of holiday. There were adults drinking in the living room, and us kids were playing in the bedrooms, with a ball and Nanny taking care of us. The thing is, I remember a female adult, not sure if it was my mother or the nanny, saying not to play under the beds because spiders were gonna get us. I remember feeling a chill running down my spine, but forgot it quickly as any kid started to play with their cousins. We were laughing, having fun. It was a noisy and vivid environment. I mean, you would think that you were safe of any weird thing happening there, but I was not. At one point, the ball we were playing with slipped under my bed. I crawled my way below it, and when I had the ball in my hand, I looked and what I saw resembled a giant spider. By giant, I mean the size of an adult human. In a sort of shadowy way. It had a face, a very simple face. It looked bluish and it smiled at me. A big, empty, black smile. The eyes were little dots, but looked extremely dark. My cousin, who is just a year older than me, came running right behind me and she saw it too, because the fear we had made us scream and run towards the nanny. We both screamed something about a giant spider or something. The nanny didn't check. She just calmed us and took us and my other cousins to the living room. And as we were entering the living room, the same thing we saw under my bed, that shadowy spider, crawled its way out of the house right when a visit came. No grown-up saw it, but I could tell us kids did. That's as far as my memory goes on that incident. Does anyone have a theory about it? I would love to hear it.
This didn't happen to me, but I was in the home. My parents have lived in their house for 25 years. I spent more than half my life living there. I'm 34 with children of my own. I'm an hour away, but I visit as often as I can. The story I'm telling is about when I lived there when I was 24. I had 2 children and I was going through a rough spot with my husband, so I stayed with the folks for a few months. My mom, dad, then 19-year-old sister, and then 26-year-old brother all lived there. I stayed in a bedroom with my kids. My sister had her own room, as did my parents. My brother was staying in a room in the basement. My mother is probably the most sweet and honest woman you will ever meet. She's been a home daycare owner and a homemaker her whole life. When I say she's honest, she does not like lying. She's really bad at it, and she's just a very serious person. Can't tell you how many times I tried to get her to lie for me when I was growing up and she wouldn't. And when she did, like telling my dad I got suspended, snuck out, smoked, her lying was so horrible my dad never believed her, and she always ended up telling him the truth later on. The reason I'm saying this is because my mom told me something that I know is true, because of how my mom is. One day, me and her were in the kitchen. I was talking to her about something while eating at the table. She was washing dishes. I remember her looking towards the den door. Real quick outline of their house. You walk in the front door, you are in the living room. To your right is a hall and are the bedrooms and a bathroom. If you keep going straight through the living room, you get to the kitchen. In the kitchen is the side door to the backyard and another door that leads to the den. In the den is the back door to the backyard. Also, the den is a staircase heading down to the steps to the basement. It's a decent-sized ranch house. Back in the 80s, there was a fire in the den and half the basement. The man who lived there died. He was burned alive. His family ended up rebuilding the den and basement. The basement was a typical cold basement, hard concrete floors and walled. It had 2 rooms. One we kept the washer dryer in. The other had a big freezer and a small room, which was my brother's room. So I see my mom looking towards the den. She dropped a glass cup in the sink and kind of just stared. I asked my mom what was wrong. She quickly looked away and said nothing was wrong. I didn't think anything of it until a few days later. I came in the house and saw Mom praying on her deceased mother's rosaries. My parents aren't religious. My dad is an atheist. My mom is a Christian, but doesn't go to church or read the Bible. Rarely does she pray. So to see her praying on my mom's rosaries definitely surprised me. You okay? I asked. My mom then smiled and said this. "You ever see anything in this house?" I told her no. And it's true, I never experienced any paranormal presences in my mom's house. Sure, it had its bumps and creaks, but what older house doesn't? I asked her why. She then told me what had been happening to her. She told me she would smell matches every so often, especially when she went to the den or basement. No one smokes in the house. We weren't big on candles, so it was kind of weird. What she told me next terrified me. She told me she had seen a man with burned, melted skin. No hair, skin just a glossy red and black. She said he had like a hunchback, like he walked bending over a bit. She said he was naked, but she saw no genitals. She just felt it was man. She told me she saw him sometimes. She said at first she thought it was her mind playing tricks. The sightings happened almost immediately after we first moved in. She only saw him a couple times throughout my childhood and teen years, but recently she's seen him more. And it wasn't just a brief, out of the corner of her eye type of thing she was used to, but he would stand in full view and just look toward her. She said maybe for like a minute, but it felt longer. She didn't know why he was showing himself more. I didn't believe her at first. I was like, yeah, okay, Mom, but she insisted. And then she started crying. I had to believe her. She asked me again if I noticed anything strange, and again I told her no. After my mom told me, I was very uncomfortable. Every time then my 8-month-old would babble or stare off the wall, I thought she could see him. I began to make plans with my husband for a reconciliation. I believe in the paranormal, although I've never experienced it myself. My first and only paranormal experience happened years later at my own home. A few months passed, and my mom was still smelling matches, but she had not seen the burned man since that day in the kitchen. I started to forget about it and made my plans to move into a new house with my husband. One night, my 19-year-old sister Megan had her friend Casey over. I was in my room with my kids. My parents were reading in their bed, and Megan and Casey were hanging out in Megan's room. Around midnight, I was laying in my bed watching TV. My kids were asleep. I then heard a scream. This was a scream that turned my blood cold. It sounded horrifying. I jumped out of bed and opened my door around the same time my mom and dad opened theirs. We looked over into Megan's room. Her door was open and we saw Casey sobbing hysterically, sitting in Megan's lap. They both were on Megan's bed. Megan looked confused. She was stroking Casey's hair, saying, "What happened? What is wrong?" My dad went back in his room, assuming it was just girl problems. My mom went into Megan's room to talk to the girls. She shut the door behind her. I went to the kitchen and got a drink, then sat in the living room to wait for my mom. About 20 minutes later, my mom came out of Megan's room, shutting the door behind her. I asked her what happened. My mom sat next to me and told me this. Casey was reading a magazine on Megan's bed, laying toward the foot. The position she was in, if she looked up, she was looking out into the hallway because Megan had her door open. So she did just that. She happened to look up at the hallway. She said she saw a bloody-looking, melted, bald man dragging himself down the hallway. He was using his arms to pull his body and his legs down the hall. His legs and torso were dragging as he made his way towards Megan's room. Casey then screamed and jumped in Megan's lap. Megan saw nothing. Megan was very skeptical and laughed at Casey, but she swore on her mother, who had recently passed away. I remember the goosebumps I got after that. I did not even want to look at the hall. Megan's door opened, and out came a swollen eyes, tear-stained face Casey with her coat and her backpack. Her and Megan left. I assume Megan took her home. I never saw Casey again. She refused to ever come back over. And that was it. I ended up moving a month later, and my mom saw the burned man no more. But what made me want to tell you this story was last week, I went over to my parents' house to visit, and it was just my brother there. Out of the blue, he says,
"Amy, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I think there's something in the basement. I keep seeing flashes of red out of the corner of my eye."
So as of right now, I told my mom what my brother said, and those two are sharing their stories. My mother only told me of the burned man, so I believed my brother when he said he was seeing something. My plan is to do some investigation on the house and the previous owner who died in the fire there. I wonder what he wants, why he only shows himself to certain people, and why does he do it so sporadically. I will make sure I thank him for not showing himself to me.
So maybe about a year ago, I was living with my parents off in rural woods. There were houses around, like walking distance, but this kind of community wasn't the type to introduce themselves whenever someone moved in. Hell, in the maybe 8 years I lived there, I had never met a single one of my neighbors. Everyone keeps to themselves. In my parents' house, when you open the door, you immediately have to walk up or down a set of stairs to get to a level. We never used the downstairs except for laundry and access to the garage, but if you did go down there, there were windows that allowed light in, and you could see maybe 2 feet up from the ground, like a slightly covered basement. Trust me, this is all relevant setup to my story. On the second floor, we have a living room that has double doors to an outdoor porch, and my room and my brother's room are at the opposite side of the house, him living across the hall from me. Okay, story. So I usually stay up pretty late, till maybe 2-3 before I'm tired. So one night, it's maybe 2:30, and I'm just starting to power down and shut off the lights and get ready for bed. I'm lying there, trying to fall asleep when I hear screaming, like someone is getting murdered screaming, and I can tell whatever it is really close to my window, if not directly underneath it. I'm so scared I freeze up and can't move. Never mind look out my window or call for help. It doesn't go on long, maybe 2 minutes, but I can't move for the rest of the night. The next morning, I'm up and just trying to tell myself it was some horrible nightmare I imagined. I talked to my brother about it later in the day, and he looks incredibly upset. He goes outside and looks all around our yard and just comes back in and tells me there's nothing out there and no signs of anything having happened. I can't stop talking about it though, and he tells me I probably just heard a fox crying, or, while rare, it is possible a mountain lion came through, or worst case scenario, I just heard an animal being eaten. Again, we live in rural woods. The closest store is 35 minutes away, but people seek this lifestyle, so there are houses within half a mile. So it's not impossible that something, not someone, was attacked. So anyway, after a few more sleepless nights, I blow it off and try to forget about it. Honestly, I think this is only the second time I've even told anyone about it. Fast forward maybe 3 months. Still sleeping in the same room and still completely awake, so I know what happened. I could not have made up. The faucet for the outside hose turned on, but it was turned full force. We don't have a hose attached to the pipe, so it literally just shoots water like a fire hydrant. Again, I'm a wimp. I shrink under my covers and pretend not to hear it. I know where the knife is next to my bed, and that's enough comfort to get me to sleep somewhat. The next morning, the hose isn't on. I talked to my brother about it, and he checks it out and tells me I must have been dreaming again. There's no sign of anything outside. The next night, I swear it happened again, but this time I managed to lift a corner of my curtain, and I see the water is on. Next morning, my brother goes out and says the pipe must have been busted from the temperatures or something, so we just have to shut the water off for the faucet until spring, and we leave it at that. Fast forward to 2 months ago, a little less than a year since the first incident. I've moved out of the house, and my brother was moved out of the state, and my parents have moved out of the state as well. I'm visiting my brother, and we're joking and reminiscing, and somehow we stumble into the mountain lion cry story, and he jokes how crazy I was to go out in the middle of the night to look for it. I stare at him. I never went outside. I was too scared. He continues to laugh and tells me he saw my footprints outside, under my window. He tells his friends I must have balls of steel to hear that cry and actually go outside. I'm now uncomfortable, but I don't bother trying to tell him it wasn't me. He wouldn't believe me. Where my parents' house is extremely small town, even though everyone lives so far away from each other. Like everyone knows your name as well as your middle name, who you lost it to, and probably even your blood type. So that is to say, anything that happens, news will spread like wildfire to everyone. So 2 days ago, my friend is talking to me over Facebook about some local who got arrested for suspicious activity. Apparently for the last year or two, he's been sneaking around at night, turning on people's water hoses, try to lure them outside to turn the Mac off, and then he would kill them, or whatever he did. He would live in the house of the dead/missing person for a bit, until bills piled up and then disappear to a new house. Now, I know small towns can gossip and exaggerate, so I'm not assuming that this has anything to do with my weird stories. Honestly, I can't let those thoughts even creep into my mind because I can't sleep as it is. But I can't stop replaying those memories and wondering if this guy was just standing under my window the entire time, waiting for me to look out or come outside, or what the hell that scream was. Seriously, look up what a mountain lion scream sounds like, and imagine that less than 20 feet from you at like 3 in the morning. Well, fuck sleeping tonight now that I'm thinking like this.
I'm a 22-year-old woman who has bipolar 1 with psychotic features and generalized anxiety disorder. When I was a senior in high school, I developed a fear of the dark. The next couple of years, that fear escalated. When I was 19, I moved into a different city with a boy I was dating, but we still had different housing. My dad has PTSD from Afghanistan and always taught me to lock doors during all times of the day and gave me a shotgun to protect myself in the city since I was living alone. I don't remember when it started, but I would get nervous about small sounds in the house. For a while, I dismissed it as paranoia about living alone, but then one night, I knew I could feel someone in my apartment. My boyfriend was spending the night and was a large football player with a black belt, so I wasn't too worried for him to look around. He checked all the closets and rooms and the locks. There was nobody. Sometime later, we came back to my apartment after being out for the day. I always check to make sure it's still locked before I put the key inside. It was locked and we walked in. I knew there was someone inside. I could feel them. My boyfriend checked everything again and again. There wasn't anyone there. Time passed, we broke up, and I started dating another person. I got my BP diagnosed and was in a crisis. My now ex and friends were over, and he made a scene about my new boyfriend. I threw everyone out and binge drank and blacked out. I came to, trash-talking myself in the mirror, and there was figures all around watching me. More time passed. At this point, it wasn't unusual for me to see this, in my doorway. It only happened when I was alone. Sometimes they were only in the doorway reflection of my mirror and not the real doorway. One of the nights at the hotel, I woke up my entire family with screaming. In my dream, I was in my childhood home. A Slenderman-esque shadow person was there. He opened his mouth and it got huge, and TV static came out of it so loudly it hurt. I had anxiety over this for months. For a long time, I only saw them by myself in my room, or if I was driving at night. My doctor said the driving ones were normal for people to see, and I dismissed them. I slept with the lights on a lot. Then I started seeing them when I'd visit my mom, or when I was with my boyfriend spending the night. I've pointed them out to my boyfriend, but he doesn't see them. This fall, I started getting sleep paralysis. The first time I thought I heard my boyfriend shuffling around at the end of the bed. But when I tried to look up, I couldn't. It was a shadow person. He walked up to me and reached down and held his hand over my eyes. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. The second time I woke up to hands clasping my shoulders. One of them grabbed my neck and started choking me. I couldn't breathe. I tried to make noise by blowing air and woke up my boyfriend. He grabbed my hand and the grip around my neck tightened. My boyfriend shook me out of it. These figures are nearly always men with no facial features. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there are many. They are menacing. Once I woke up to the force of a woman throwing herself angrily on top of me, and I hid under the covers. Once he had red eyes, but it didn't scare me because I knew I was only seeing that because I'd just seen the nightmare. Sometimes they feel more real than others, so I can ignore them or jump up screaming. I get nightmares of them chasing me around my apartment, and recently, my mom told me my dad had a nightmare of shadow people chasing him and it really scared him. My meds don't stop me from seeing them, and my doctors don't know why, but lately, they've started waving at me from my doorway.